Hello, I'm Larry Wilson, and welcome to the September 2005 broadcast. Today we continue our study on the book that was sealed up with 7 seals. If you don't already have some idea about the role and significance of this book, and if you have seen the previous 4 segments, I don't think I can say much more that will be helpful. After I have finished answering a few questions about the book in today's study, we will turn our attention to the 7 seals. In the simplest of terms, the book sealed up with 7 seals is God's way of resolving his biggest problem. I want to have you review and examine 6 key points. Let's go to the computer screen. And let's notice, point number 1, from the beginning of sin, the Father's biggest problem has been handling the problem of sin in such a way that sin will never rise again. God's biggest problem from the beginning of sin has been handling the problem of sin in such a way that sin and rebellion will never rise again. Number 2, we know that the Father wrote the book of life before any life was created on earth. And we found that both in Psalm 139, verse 16, Revelation 17, verse 8, and depending on how you wanted to translate it, Revelation 13, verse 8 as well. Number 3, we know that Jesus alone was found worthy to receive this book and to break open its seals. Jesus is the only being in the universe who could exonerate God's government, which has been slandered by sinners. You got to think about this for just a minute. Jesus is the only being in the universe, the only one worthy, who could exonerate God's government, which was slandered by Lucifer and his followers. And at the same time, Jesus is the only being in the universe who can save man from the curse of sin. That's why this book is so important. God is handling and dealing with the sin problem in a way so that sin will not rise a second time. Point number 4. We know that once the Lamb received the book from the right hand of the Father, we know that that book sealed with 7 seals is called the Lamb's Book of Life, because the Lamb came and received the book from the Father's hand in Revelation 5. And thereafter, John calls it the Lamb's Book of Life. Number 5, we also know that the Book of Life will be opened up at the end of the 1,000 years. Therefore, we know that the 7th seal will be broken at the end of the 1,000 years. How do we know that? Well, we know that the book of life is only opened once in all the Bible, and that's found in Revelation 20, verse 12. And that occurs at the end of the 1,000 years. And because we know that the book of life is the book with the 7 seals, we know that the 7th and final seal is broken at the end of the 1,000 years. And in fact, as we study Revelation more closely as we examine the rules of interpretation and see how this unfolds, this will prove to be true. And the sixth and final point that I am producing here as a summary to get started today, we know that God, the Father, will prove three things when the book of life is opened up. First thing he's going to prove is that he has perfect foreknowledge. He knew exactly everything that would happen before anything took place, and he wrote it down with a perfection that is just astonishing. That will be revealed when the book of life is opened up. Number two, the Father will prove that even though he has omnipotence, all power, and he has omniscience, perfect foreknowledge, he will not use these amazing powers to manipulate his subjects. He's going to prove that. And how he does this is truly fascinating. I'm going to get into this in detail today. And the third thing that the Father is going to prove is that even though he foreknew the rise, the agony, and the price of sin, he did nothing to prevent it. Because as a God of love, he freely grants his children the power of choice. Even though he's going to show us what he knew, we will behold that he did nothing to prevent the rise of sin. He did nothing to stop his creatures from choosing rebellion, because as a God of love, he grants us freely the power of choice. In other words, when the contents of the book of life are seen by all the universe, this book will prove to the universe that God can be totally trusted. He is pure in heart, and his ways are righteous. He did not predestine the rise of sin, nor has he selected who shall be saved and who shall be destroyed. These truths prove, and will prove once and for all at the end of the age, that the choice was ours. We can choose to be rebellious toward God and his Spirit, or we can choose to be submissive to his laws. The choice is ours. And of course, so are the consequences. Because we have the power of choice, we are responsible for our actions. This is an important concept because this proves that God is not responsible for the presence of sin. We are responsible for our actions. And when Lucifer sinned, that didn't make God responsible for the presence of sin. When Adam and Eve sinned, that didn't make God responsible for the presence of sin. They chose to sin. Now, you and I are in a slightly different situation. Because we are born into sin, we don't always exercise the power of choice correctly. The law of sin is at work in our bodies. We are under its curse. And sometimes we sin without intending to do so. And this is why the Apostle John wrote, there is a sin that is not unto death. It's the accidental sin. But even though we commit the accidental sin, we are still responsible for our actions. And this is why God requires us to make things right with whomever we have offended before we can make it right with him. Now, I'm going to review some sequence of events And after I have finished with this, I'm going to respond to two very important questions. Let's go back to the computer screen and look at these questions. The first question is, and this is a key question, when did Jesus receive the book of life from the right hand of the Father? And the second question we're going to look at, which seal is the next one to be broken open? These two questions are profoundly important to our study and our understanding of God's plans. First thing I want to do is take you to a little drawing that I've put together. And if you've read my book, Jesus, the Alpha and the Omega, or if you've read my book on Daniel, you know how that I say that in order to understand God's big picture, God's planning, you have to understand the 5 essential Bible doctrines. I want to show you specifically how the state of man and death affects this book and the judgment that God has ordained, and the process of concluding the plan of salvation and all that's involved. I want you to notice I have on the screen 2 little men. Number 1, number 2. The number 1 guy here, his name is Abel, and the number 2 guy, his name is Cain. I have listed them in this order because Abel died first, and many years later, Cain died. And up above their heads, I have a timeline moving from left to right. So this Cain and Abel, their story, takes us back about 6,000 years. Abel was killed by his brother Cain, and so Abel simply was put to sleep. When he died, his soul did not go to heaven or to hell. Abel just rested in the grave. And likewise, many years later, when Cain died, maybe Cain lived to be 800 years old. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. We do know that Adam lived for a very long time, and we know that Noah lived a very long time, and Methuselah lived a very long time. So I would assume that Cain lived a very long time. But anyway, when Cain died, just like Abel, they both slept in the ground. And the Bible teaches that when we die, the soul sleeps. More than 50 times in the New Testament, death is referred to as sleep. It's called sleep because sleep is temporary. Temporary. Abel and Cain will live again. They are not eternally dead, and they are not eternally alive. They are, as it were, sleeping. Now, during the time that Cain and Abel were alive on earth, God has some camcorder angels that recorded all of their actions. And so there is a record of Abel bringing his sacrifices to the Lord. There's a record of Cain bringing his fruit in violation of the command. And there's a record of Cain killing Abel. And you can see the camcorder here is recorded, connected to the book of deeds. So Cain and Abel's lives are fully recorded in the book of deeds. More accurate than the lens of this camcorder is God's ability to record life's events, because he not only sees what's going on the outside, he sees what's going on the inside. So, millions of people lived after Abel died. Millions perished at the time of the flood. Millions have perished down through the ages, and they have all rested, continued to sleep, if you will, awaiting one of two resurrections. Now, let me talk about this for just a minute. There are two resurrections. There's a resurrection for the righteous and a resurrection for the wicked. But in order to determine who comes up in each resurrection, the dead have to be judged. And the dead will be judged out of the books. That is, the books of deeds that are recorded and in heaven's library. Actually, heaven's temple, if you will. And this judging the dead and deciding who will be righteous and who will be wicked is how heaven's temple is cleansed. And for those of you who remember our study in Daniel chapter 8, the cleansing of the sanctuary, that is, the judgment of the dead, began in 1844. And that process is still ongoing at the present time. Jesus plays out each life for the angels to observe, and then he makes a declaration that this person is righteous or wicked. Now, in this illustration, you see I have numbered Abel as 1 because he's the first man to die. I suppose that would make him the first man to be judged. And let's suppose Cain is the second man to die, and that would make him the second man to be judged when the time for judgment came. And that time for cleansing heaven's temple is 1844. So in 1844, Abel, his life is played out before the angels, and the camcorder tape, or the book of deeds, if you will, plays out, and everybody sees Abel's life. And let's suppose that Jesus declares Abel to be a righteous man. Okay, that would be the year 1844. Well, Abel continues sleeping in his tomb until the time for the first resurrection arrives. And the first resurrection of the righteous, the righteous come forth in the first resurrection, and that occurs at the second coming. And so there you see Abel. I've given him a set of wings because he flies up out of the ground and meets Jesus in the air. Okay? So that's the story of the judgment, of how the books of deeds are used, and how the temple in heaven is cleansed. Now, let's go to man number 2 here, Cain, who's sleeping in the earth. For dust you are, and unto dust shall you return. So his soul is sleeping. He comes up in the judgment. Let's say he's the second person to be judged. But Jesus looks over his life and declares Cain to be a wicked man. Well, as a wicked man, he doesn't come up until the second resurrection. The resurrection of the wicked happens at the end of the 1,000 years. You can find that in Revelation 20. As you look at my little picture, you see that the holy city has descended to earth at the end of the 1,000 years. You can see Abel, this is man number 1. He's standing up here in the city, and Jesus down here in front of the city has resurrected Cain, this is man number 2, because Jesus is going to confront Cain face to face and tell Cain why he could not be saved. He's going to provide the evidence to Cain as to why he could not save him. So this is a short explanation of how the judgment of the dead occurs. They are judged from the books. They are determined righteous or wicked by the record of their lives. And depending on how they are judged, it depends on which resurrection they come out of, they come up in. They come in the first resurrection at the second coming, or the second resurrection at the end of the 1,000 years. And during that 1,000 years, the saints will determine the proper restitution for the wicked, so that when Jesus confronts the wicked, he not only tells them why he couldn't save them, he also explains to them their sentence, which will be carried out with fire. Okay, so this is called the investigative portion of the judgment. Now, let's go to the living. We have studied Cain and Abel, the dead. Let's look at another chart of the living. Okay. Here you can see I've taken the same chart and added 2 more people. We'll call these people number 3 and 4. Now these are sinners, just like Cain and Abel were sinners. But the living will be tested in a different way than the dead. The dead were judged out of the books. The living, though, will be tested with the Sabbath rest test. And the wicked will fail the test of faith, because only those who have a loyal and complete faith in God will be able to stand the testing that's coming. The testing will last 1,260 days, and the Great Tribulation, this happens during the Great Tribulation, which lasts for a total of 1,335 days. This is the judgment bar of Christ, phase 2. So here is person number 3, here's person number 4. They are put through the Great Tribulation, and let's suppose person number 3 goes through faithful and righteous to the very end. Well, at the second coming, you can see that person number 3 will be sealed, and his sinful nature will be removed from him, and he will be joining Abel to meet Jesus in the air. This is what 1 Thessalonians 4 is saying. Then we which are alive and remain will be caught up together with them to meet the Lord in the air. So person number 3 goes through the testing time faithfully, remaining loyal in his faith and obedience to God, and he is sealed, and when Jesus comes, he will be called up in the air to join with the dead in Christ who meet Jesus up in the sky. Person number 4, though, in this illustration, they go through the testing time. They don't have the necessary faith. They capitulate. They receive the mark of the beast, and you can see what happens to them. They are condemned to die. And at the second coming, this sword that comes out of Jesus' mouth kills the wicked, and the birds gorge themselves on their flesh. So the wicked now will sleep through the 1,000 years, and then they will come up at the second resurrection. So here we have Cain, person number 2, and we have the living wicked, person number 4. And you can see they confront Jesus at the end of the 1,000 years, and you can see Abel and the living that passed the test of faith. You can see how they're in the holy city at the end of the 1,000 years. Jesus meets with the wicked, and thus he explains to them the restitution that they're going to pay with fire. So this little story of how God judges the living and the dead, and how that we are tested either through the Great Tribulation test or through the books of record, and the outcome, this little story is very important to understand because it relates directly to the 7 seals and to the book of life. Okay, now that we've discussed this, and you have the larger picture, to sort of think about for a moment, let me zoom out just a little bit and give you the the big picture that you can sort of ponder here. Let me set up my screen here to show you a few more things while we have just a couple of minutes left in this segment. Now, let's go back to camera 1 for a moment. And let me take you back to the book of Daniel for a moment so that you can understand something very important. In Daniel chapter 2, we have the metal man, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. We have then the feet of iron and clay, and then we have the 10 toes. And you can see I've put some dates down here. I have no idea when the second coming will be, but I'm just putting some dates down here so that you can see that Jesus is coming, and he will be appearing on earth at a time when 10 kings rule over the earth. We are still living right now in the time period of the feet. Some strong, some nations weak, some nations strong. Okay, going back to Daniel 7. You know already how the lion and Babylon represent the same kingdoms, the bear and Medo-Persia, the leopard and Grecia, and the monster beast is Rome. And then we have the 10 horns that came out of Rome, the 10 kingdoms that divided the Roman Empire, and then the little horn that came up and plucked up 3 of the original 10. So this became the 8th horn, if you will. And you notice that the 8th horn came to its end at the end of the 1260 years in 1798. Okay, you know about that. And then we go back up to the next prophecy of Daniel 8, and you know about the ram and the goat and the 70 weeks and the 2300 years. And you know how the ram and the bear and the chest of silver all represent the same thing, and the goat and the leopard and the thighs of brass all represent the same kingdoms. And you notice we have a prophecy that of the 70 weeks, it comes down and is synchronized on the death, on the ministry of Jesus. He dies in the middle of the 70th week. The reason this is all important is because we start a prophecy, the longest prophecy in the Bible, reaching 2,300 years, down to 1844. Now, I only have a couple of seconds left in this segment, but I'm going to show you that 1798 and 1844 are 2 very important dates, and they're 46 years apart for a very important reason. God set this prophecy up in such a way. Let's see if I can get this lined up for you quickly here, and then we'll zoom out a bit so that you can, I want you to try to see what I've done here. Let's see if we can get this. I want you to see that seals number 1 and 3 link up to 1798 and 1844. Because we're living here today, and the next seal to open will be the 4th seal. These 2 great time periods, 1,260 years, that's 1 1/4 millenniums. And this time period of 2.3 millenniums, 2,300 years, they dovetail in their termination dates at 46 years apart because they relate to the first 3 seals. Well, we're out of time for this segment, but we are going to continue this investigation, and I hope that you will stay tuned because this is an amazing story once you begin to understand what God is going to do. May God bless you is my prayer.